makes that show so intriguing, it's not the fact that the host of that show just asks about questions about facts, amen, questions about basic things that they feel like the other partner should know, or you know, your favorite color, or your favorite song, or your favorite sports team, or trivial things like that. But the host goes a little bit further from facts and asks questions about scenarios, amen. What would your spouse do, amen, if X, Y, and Z? Would your spouse do this, or would your spouse do this, amen? Or even, you know, things that really test how much you know about your newlywed spouse, amen. And these things show either for some couples how intimate that they become in the courting process, in the process between first meeting and dating and then marriage, or it shows how much you still have to go before you really learn that partner and really begin to trust that partner and know that you have the foundations of a good marriage taking place. Amen. And such is the same expectation that Jesus has of his disciples. Amen. If his disciples were to serve God in the fullness, amen, they needed to know him fully. Amen. And so Jesus asked his disciples two pointed, very direct questions. Amen. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? In other words, what are people saying about me? Who do they think that I am? And now Jesus asked this question not because he's self-conscious, not because he has low self-esteem. Amen. Not, you know, Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus was God. Jesus is God. So he has no self-esteem issues. Amen. He has no reason to get down on himself for anything. He has no self-consciousness. He doesn't have any of those things. That's not why he's asking who people think that he is. Amen. He wasn't asking because of that, but he was inquiring because he was setting up. Amen. He was setting up a contrast between a very common cursory knowledge of who Jesus is, amen, and a deeper revelation of him. Right. And if we look at verse 14, amen. One thing that we notice here, notice very something curious about what the disciples say about who others thought Jesus was or is, amen. The first person that's listed is Elijah, amen. Amen. In verse 14 it says, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And so we look at John the Baptist. John the Baptist, who was John the Baptist? John the Baptist was Jesus' slightly older cousin, amen, who told everyone who was in earshot. He said, look, there's someone coming behind me that's much greater than I am, amen, and he is the Messiah. He's the one that you need to follow, amen. He's the one whose words that you need to listen to. And if we look back a couple of chapters in Matthew, chapter 14, we learn that King Herod had John the Baptist beheaded. Amen. And then secondly, we see Elijah. Who was Elijah? Elijah was an Old Testament prophet, amen, whose life was so pleasing to God that according to 2 Kings chapter 2, he was translated. He didn't taste death, amen, but he was translated. Jesus wasn't even translated. Just being translated was to say that Elijah didn't taste mortal death. Amen. His body was not slain. Amen. He was not crucified. He did not die of disease, but the Lord took him up. He translated him, amen, from this life to the next, from this world to the next. Amen. He just took him in bodily form up to heaven. Because that's how pleasing his life was to the Lord. That's what Elijah was. Well, and Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets, that's the other person that was mentioned, amen, in verse 14. All of Jeremiah and all of the others, they were all great men of the Old Testament who served God in the very difficult and thankless office of the prophet. Now, what here is a very common characteristic with all of these men listed here, amen. What is the characteristic? The characteristic here is that all of these men were dead. Amen. Jesus is asking, amen, who do people say that I am? And so the disciples started listing dead people. dead person, and more dead people. It's talking about who do you say, who do they say that I am? And they're talking about who they say he was, or has the characteristics of. People who are no longer living. I find that very curious. Well, here Jesus was in the flesh, healing bodies, delivering souls on a daily basis. But according to the disciples, people could only relate to the power of Jesus based off of what they already knew about the Lord, amen? Or based on what they already knew about the past, amen? Not what Jesus was doing in the present or in the future, amen? Well, he couldn't deal with them based off of who Jesus was, or who Jesus was at that present time, amen? Because they had not come to have any kind of relationship with Jesus at that time, amen? Does anybody have somebody in your life? They can only deal with you based on what they knew of you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. People who you knew from childhood who still deal with you on that childhood level, amen. You've had a whole lifetime of experiences since that time, and you've done other things. You've grown not only physically, not only mentally, but you've grown spiritually, amen. But people still want to deal with you on that level, amen. Well, and sometimes we have to take care. We have to take time to evaluate the people in our lives, amen. Because we can't have too many people in our lives who can only deal with us on that level from 20 years ago. Because there's a deliverance that happened to you, amen. There's a deliverance that you've been through from 20 years ago, between 20 years ago and right now, amen. And people who only knew you from 20 years ago and can only deal with you on that level, amen, that threatens, whether they know it or not, whether they're trying to or not, that threatens to take away that deliverance. Amen. Yeah. And so they only dealt with Jesus based off of what they knew about other people. And then Jesus asks a second question. Amen. He says, who do you say that I am? Yeah. And when Peter answered that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus blessed him. Jesus blessed him in verses 18 and 19, amen. He says, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of Hades will not be able to prevail against it, amen. Amen. He blessed him because he understood, amen, that it was insight gained by having a closer walk with Jesus than the norm, amen. Amen. It was a closer walk. Amen. Jesus said in verse 17, and Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. Amen. So he was ecstatic, amen, that Peter was able to give this answer, because this is not something that had yet come out of his own mouth, but this was something that was a greater revelation that Peter had gotten of who Jesus was. Amen. Yeah. But then Jesus went on into verse 20, and he told his disciples not to tell anybody. Not to tell anybody about the revelation that their brother Peter had just received and shared with him and with all the others. Amen. So why would Jesus tell Peter and the other disciples, don't tell anybody? All right. Yes, I am the Messiah, but you know what? Don't mention that. All right. Just keep that on the hush-hush for right now, okay? Why would Jesus say that? If we look at various points, throughout the gospel accounts, we see that Jesus over and over again, he told the people that he healed, he told the people that he had dealings with, he told them to go and sin no more. He didn't, but he told them, you know, don't talk about this experience. Just go and sin no more. Amen. You don't have to tell you don't have to tell people who I am. Amen. They're gonna see who I am because of how you changed, amen. So he says, don't tell anybody, but rather go and sin no more. But why would Jesus have that approach? Why would Jesus tell them to do that? Aren't we supposed to preach the gospel, amen, at all times, amen, in season and out of season, amen? Isn't our first job as Christians supposed to be evangelism, amen? Are we supposed to be trying to tell other people about the gospel of Jesus Christ? Are we supposed to be living an example, amen? Aren't we supposed to be talking about the example that we're living, amen, so that somebody else can come to know Christ for themselves, amen? Amen. Why that approach? Well, if we look at verse 21, we see why. Amen. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering